The woman at the stage put down at the crossroads had one trunk, a steady face, and a folded letter in her glove with his name on it, and Caleb Hart sat his wagon at the edge of the road and did not get down right away, because she was not what the letter had led him to expect. She was tall and broad and plain dressed, a big woman in a gray traveling coat gone shiny at the cuffs, and she stood by her trunk in the white noon glare and looked back at him without flinching and without hurry, the way a person looks who has been looked at wrong before and decided a long time ago not to mind it. "You are Mr. Hart," she said. It was not quite a question. "I am," he said. "Then I am Marin Webb," she said, "and I expect we had best get out of the sun. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel." He got down then and took the trunk, which was heavier than a woman's trunk had a right to be, and he did not ask what was in it, and she did not say. He handed her up onto the seat, and she took the offered hand the way she took everything, plainly, without making a thing of it, and they rode out toward the ranch with the dust coming up gold behind the wheels and neither of them saying much, because there was not much that needed saying that a letter and a justice of the peace had not already arranged between them. The arrangement was this, and they both knew it without going over it. Caleb Hart had a section of good bottomland and a mortgage that had eaten 3 years of bad luck, and a note coming due at the bank in the fall that he could not pay, and a clause in his dead father's will that left the deed to him only on the condition that he be married and settled by his 35th year, which the old man had put in out of spite or out of love. Nobody now living could say which. Marin Webb had answered the notice in the territorial paper because she was 31 and alone and tired of cooking in another woman's kitchen for wages, and because the notice had said plainly that it was a marriage of mutual convenience and nothing was expected beyond the keeping of a house. They were wed at the courthouse the afternoon she arrived, with the clerk and the clerk's wife for witnesses, and Caleb put a thin band on her finger that had been his mother's, and that was the whole of it. He showed her the house that evening, which was a good house gone tired, and the kitchen, and the small room off the kitchen that would be hers. "Mine is upstairs," he said, and stopped, because he did not know how to say the rest of it. "I did not come here for that," she said, taking the trouble off him. "I came to keep your house, and you came to keep your land. We understand each other." "We do," he said, and was grateful, and did not yet know how grateful he would come to be. That night she unpacked the heavy trunk, and it was full of seed. He found it out the next morning when he came down before light, and she was already in the kitchen with the lamp lit and the coffee going, and there were paper packets laid out on the table in rows, labeled in a careful hand, beans and squash and 3 kinds of corn and turnip and field pea and a dozen more. She poured him a cup without asking and set it by his hand. "You are a farmer," he said. "My father was," she said. "I am what is left of him." She did not look up from the packets. "You have got bottomland sitting in weeds, Mr. Hart. I walked it last evening. The soil is black down a foot, and you are running 30 head on it like it was hardpan. With your leave, I will put the low field in before the week is out." He looked at her a while. Then he said, "The low field has not been worked since my father died." "I know," she said. "I could tell." And she gathered the packets back into their box, and the subject was closed, and by Thursday the low field was turned and planted, and Caleb Hart stood at the fence in the evening and looked at the long dark rows where there had been nothing but cheat grass, and felt something move in him that he had thought was dead, and named it nothing and went in to supper. She did not work the land to please him. She worked it because it was in her hands to do, and because a thing left undone was a thing she could not abide, and she would have done the same on any ground that would have her. But the land did not know that, and the land answered her. The corn came up in rows so straight you could sight a rifle down them. The squash ran out broad green leaves over the dark earth. She had a way with growing things that was not luck and was not magic, only attention, the patient daily attention of a person who had nothing else she was withholding it from, and the bottomland that had gone hard with grief under a grieving man came soft and green again under her hands in a single season. The cottonwoods at the ditch were full and green, and the heat came up off the flats by 10 every morning, and Marin Webb was out in it in a wide straw hat with a hoe, and the neighbors driving past on the section road slowed their wagons to look, and what they saw they carried into town. It was the Widow Pell who said it out loud first at the store, the way the Widow Pell said most things. With her gloves on and her chin up and her voice pitched to carry. Marin had come in for nails and lamp oil and stood at the counter while Hollis, the storekeeper, weighed the nails, and the Widow Pell came up the aisle behind her with her marketing and set it down and looked Marin up and down slow, the way you price a heifer. "So you are the one Caleb Hart sent away for," she said. We did wonder what would come off that stage. She let her eyes finish their travel. A man marries in a hurry to beat a banknote. I suppose he cannot be choosy about the particulars. Hollis went still at the scale. Marin counted out her coins and laid them on the counter and did not hurry. He was not choosy, she said. He was practical. So was I. And she took up her nails and her oil and stepped around the woman, and at the door she stopped and looked back and said in the same level voice, "The low field is in corn, if you care to drive by and price that too." Then she went out, and Hollis behind the counter turned to the shelf so the Widow Pell would not see his face. She told Caleb none of it. But Hollis told him the next time he was in town, because Hollis liked him and thought he ought to know what his wife had walked into and walked out of, and Caleb listened with his hat in his hands and his jaw working, and said only, "She say that. The low field in corn." "She did," said Hollis. Caleb put his hat on. "That field is the best corn in the county," he said, and went out, and bought a length of blue ribbon at the dry goods 2 doors down before he drove home, and could not have told you why, and left it on the kitchen table where she would find it, and went out to the barn before she came in, so as not to be there when she did. She found it. She stood over it a while with her hands gone still on the back of a chair. Then she put it in the box with the seed, where she kept the thing she meant to keep, and she did not mention it, and neither did he, and the next morning the coffee was poured and the day went on. The days took on a shape that was nobody's plan. She was up before him, always, the lamp lit and the stove warm when he came down, and she would set his coffee by his right hand without his asking, and he would take it without thanks. The two of them passed the need for the small words inside the first month. She learned how he took his eggs, and he learned that she hummed under her breath when she was working a thing out, and stopped the moment she knew she was heard. He brought her a flat stone from the creek that was the right size and weight to hold her seed packets down against the wind on the porch table, and set it there without a word, and she used it, and it stayed. It was a Sunday she told him about her father, though he had not asked. The two of them on the porch in the long evening shade shelling the first of the field, peas into a bowl between them. She did not look at him while she said it. She looked at the peas. He had 160 acres in the eastern part of the territory, she said. Good ground, better than this. He taught me everything I have got in my hands. She split a pod and ran her thumb down it. There was a dry year, and then a worse one, and then the man who held his paper came out in a good buggy, the way they do. And my father could not meet it, and he signed the place over rather than be put off it in front of the county. He was dead inside the year. A man can live without a great many things, she said, but my father could not live without ground to put his hands in. Caleb had gone still with a pod half open in his own hands. He did not say he was sorry, because she would not have wanted it. So when you sat your wagon at the road and looked at me like I was a poor bargain, she said, and now there was the faintest dry turn at the corner of her mouth, you will forgive me that I had already decided I did not much care what you thought, so long as there was ground. He looked down at the bowl between them, half full of the pale green peas off his own low field. I did not think you a poor bargain, he said. I thought you were not what the letter led me to expect. No, she said. I expect I never am. And she went back to the peas, and the matter was set down between them gently, and the evening cooled, and a nighthawk came over the field, and after a while he said, You have got your hands in ground again anyhow, and she said, I have, and that was all. And it was enough. The summer built the way summers do in that country, hot and dry, and then a black thunderhead stacking up over the ridge of an afternoon, and the smell of rain that mostly did not come. The two of them fell into a way of living that neither had planned and neither named. He fixed the things that had gone to ruin while he was too low to fix them, the sagging gate, the pump that had not drawn right in 2 years, the loose board on the porch step, and he did them without saying, the way she planted without asking, and the place came back around them on both sides at once, the land and the house, as if the whole of it had only been waiting for 2 people who would not quit. His chair at the table moved over those weeks. It had sat at the far end, the head, where his father had sat with the length of the table between him and the kitchen. By the 2nd week it had come down to the middle. By the 3rd it was at the corner nearest the stove, nearest her, where a man sits who wants to be handed things, and neither of them remarked on it, and the coffee was nearer to hand from there, and that was reason enough if anyone had asked, and no one asked. There came an afternoon the sky stacked up black over the ridge in earnest and did not bluff, and the rain came down in ropes for an hour, and the dry creek above the low field came up brown and fast, the way those creeks do, all at once and from nowhere. And the water came over the bank at the head of the field and started cutting a channel straight down through the young corn. Marin saw it from the kitchen window and was out the door before Caleb was up from the table, going heavy and fast through the rain in her skirts. She was at the head of the field with a shovel when he caught her up, throwing dirt and sod into the cut to turn the water, the rain coming off her hat brim in a sheet, and she did not waste breath telling him what to do. She put the second shovel in his hands and pointed, and they worked the bank together in the pouring wet, the two of them building a low dike of mud and sod across the cut while the brown water pushed at it and found the weak places, and they filled the weak places. An hour of it, 2, soaked through and blind with rain and not stopping, until the creek crested and began to fall, and the water gave up its push and ran back to its own channel and left the corn standing, beaten down and muddy but rooted, alive. They stood in the runoff at the head of the saved field, both of them mud to the waist, the rain gone to a soft fall now, and the sun coming yellow under the edge of the cloud. I have never, Caleb started, and could not think how to end it, and did not. Another quarter hour and it would have taken the whole field, she said. She leaned on the shovel, breathing. Your boots are ruined. So are yours, he said. Mine were already, she said, and looked at him sidelong out from under the dripping brim of her hat, and the corner of her mouth moved. And he turned and looked out at the standing corn so that she would not see his face do what it was doing, and they walked back up to the house through the steaming field with their 2 shovels over their shoulders, not touching, walking close. By August, the corn was higher than her head, and the squash had set fruit, and the field peas were ready, and the banknote was still coming. But the crop standing in that low field was worth more than the note 3 times over, and any man in the county could see it now driving past. That was the trouble, as it turned out. A standing crop that good on land that had been written off was a thing that drew notice, and not all notice is kind. The man who drove out from town in the good buggy was named Royce Dunmore, and he held the paper on the Hart mortgage, having bought it from the bank that sprang for cents, the way men, like Dunmore, buy other men's bad years. He came on a Sunday when he knew Caleb would be home, and he did not get down from the buggy, and he had his offer ready the way a man has a thing ready that he has said before to other men on other porches. "I will be plain, Hart," he said. "That note is mine now, and it is due in 6 weeks, and you cannot pay it, we both know that." He looked out over the green low field with the eye of a man, pricing it. "But I am not unreasonable. Sign the place over to me clean, today, no lawyers, and I will give you $100 to walk away with, which is 100 more than the bank would give you when it takes the place in the fall." He smiled. A man your age, no sons, married to, he glanced at Marin in the doorway and let it sit. "To whatever this arrangement is, you would do better to start fresh somewhere. I am doing you a kindness." Caleb stood on his own porch step with his hand on the rail that he had mended with his own hands, and he was quiet a long moment, and Marin stood in the doorway behind him and did not speak, because it was his to answer. "No," Caleb said. Dunmore's smile stayed where it was. "You will lose it anyway. This way you lose it with $100. The other way you lose it with nothing." "I will lose it with nothing, then," Caleb said, "if I lose it. But I do not think I will lose it." He came down off the step and stood at the buggy wheel and looked up at the man. "There is a crop in that field worth more than your note. I will sell it at the fall price and pay you to the penny, and you will not get this land. You drove out here to buy a dead man's ground cheap." He looked at Marin once and back. "You are about 6 weeks too late. The ground is not dead anymore." Dunmore looked at the field a long moment, and the smile went off his face by degrees as the arithmetic of it came home to him. A standing crop he had not counted on land he had counted on getting for the price of a bad note. He gathered his reins. "We will see what the fall brings," he said. "Crops fail." And he turned the buggy hard and drove out, the dust coming up behind him, and Caleb stood in the road and watched him go and did not move until the dust had settled all the way down. That fall the crop did not fail. They brought it in together, hired 2 boys from the next section for the heavy weeks, and the corn came off that low field in such yield that Hollis at the store, who also bought grain, stood in the wagon yard and shook his head over it. It was around then that the town began to change its mind about her, and it began, as those things do, with one small thing in plain sight. The Widow Pell's own kitchen garden had failed that summer, blighted and yellow, a hard blow to a proud woman who had always set the best table in the district and let everyone know it. Marin heard of it from Hollis, and the next time she was in town she did a thing nobody expected. She drove out to the Pell place uninvited with a basket of her own squash and a paper of seed and a jar of something brown she had cooked down off a recipe of her father's, and she walked the failed garden with the Widow Pell in the white morning glare and told her plainly what had killed it and how to keep it from killing the next one. and she put the seed in the woman's hand. And she did not say a word about the store, and she did not stay to be thanked. The widow Pell stood in her ruined garden with the seed in her glove and watched the wagon go, and what she felt she did not say to Marin, but she said it to the next 3 women she saw, which was the widow Pell's way of being sorry. That Webb woman, she told them, the Hart woman, I will say this. She knows more about ground than any man in this county, and she came out to my place and never once threw the store in my face, which is more than I would have done. By the church social she was calling her Mrs. Hart Plain. And once a thing like that turns, it stays turned, and the talk in the district went the way the creek had gone, back into its right channel, and ran clear. Marin told Caleb none of this either. But he heard it, the way a man hears things, and one evening he said over supper, You drove out to the Pell place. I had squash going to waste, she said. You had a wagon load of reasons to let that woman's garden rot, he said, and you drove out instead and saved it. Marin set down her fork. A garden is a garden, she said. It did not do anything to me. And she would not be drawn further, and he looked at her across the corner of the table where his chair had come to sit, and he understood something about the woman he had married that the bargain had not told him, which was that she did not keep accounts the way other people kept them, and that a man could go a long way and not find another like her. And he was quiet the rest of the meal with the size of that understanding. Marin had got top price on the grain by holding the field peas back until the prices climbed, which she had known to do the way she knew everything about growing and selling a thing, and when it was all sold and counted there was enough to pay Royce Dunmore his note to the penny, and a margin left over besides. Caleb rode to town and paid it, and got the paper marked satisfied and brought the deed home clear, his name on it alone, his father's condition met, and the land his free of any man. He laid the deed on the kitchen table that evening the way he had laid the blue ribbon, and Marin looked at it, and at him. It is yours, she said. Free it is, he said. He did not pick the deed back up, on account of you. She was at the stove with her back to him, and she kept it there and worked the pan and did not turn around. The land would have come back for anybody who worked it, she said. There was nothing in it but corn. He came across the kitchen and stood near her, and he was a man who said a thing once and did not explain what he did not need to explain. And he had been turning this one over for a long time, looking for the short way to say it. There had been an evening a week before that he had not been able to put down, that he carried with him now up to this moment. The 2 of them had sat late at the table after the lamp was the only light, him mending a bridle and her with a basket of mending of her own. And neither had spoken for the better part of an hour, and it had not been an empty hour, it had been the fullest hour he had spent in years. The small sounds of her needle and his awl in the stove ticking down, and at the end of it she had risen and set her hand for one moment on his shoulder as she passed. Not a thing, the briefest wait of a hand. The kind of thing a wife does without thinking, and gone into her room off the kitchen, and he had sat there a long while after with the bridle forgotten in his hands, and known that he could not go on in a house with her behind a separate door and call it a bargain. That was the night he had started looking for the short way to say it. He had found it now. Marin, he said, I married you to keep the land. I know it, she said to the pan. That was the bargain. I am asking to change the bargain, he said. The land is kept. I find I do not want you in the room off the kitchen. He stopped and made himself finish it, because it was owed. I want you at the head of the table. I want it to be a marriage, not the paper kind. I should have said it sooner. I did not know how, and then I did know how and was afraid to. She stood with her hands gone still on the handle of the pan, and she stayed that way one beat longer than the cooking needed, and that long stillness from a woman whose hands were never still was the whole of her answer before she ever turned around. Then she turned around. "You left a blue ribbon on this table in July," she said. "I did," he said. "I have kept it," she said. "It is in the box with the seed." She looked at him steady, the way she had looked at him across the road that first white noon, but it was not the same look now. It had warmed all the way through. "I did not come here for that, Caleb. I told you so." But a person can come for one thing and find another, and only be a fool if she pretends she did not find it. She set the pan off the heat. "Yes, I will sit at the head of your table. I've wanted to for a while now and been too proud to say." He crossed the last of the floor and put his arms around the big strong frame of her, careful, the way you hold a thing you have only just understood is yours to hold, and she let herself be held, which for her was a great surrender. Her face down against his shoulder and her eyes shut. They stood like that a while in the lamplight with the deed on the table and the supper going cold, and neither of them caring about the supper, and when she stepped back she kept hold of his two hands a moment and looked down at them, the hard rancher's hands that had mended every broken thing on the place, and she said, "Lo, you fixed the porch step the second week I was here. I stood at the window and watched you do it and thought, there is a man who has decided to go on living. I made up my mind about you then. I have only been waiting for you to catch up." He had not known she had watched him fix the step. He did not know what to say to it, and so he said nothing and lifted one of her hands and held it against his jaw a moment, which said the thing better than words would have, and she let him. His mother's thin band was already on her hand. He had nothing new to give her that night but the truth, which he had given, and the deed on the table, which was as much hers as his, and the house quiet around them, and the long, dark rows out in the low field gone to stubble now and waiting for the spring. They moved her things up out of the room off the kitchen the next morning, not all at once the way the chair had moved down the table, a little at a time over a few days, until the room off the kitchen was a sewing room and a place to start seedlings in the cold months, and her trunk stood empty in the loft, the seed long since gone into the ground and come up and been sold and saved back for next year. The district saw how it was with them by the look of the two of them in the wagon coming into church together that fall, and nobody in that country had to be told the particulars of a thing they could see plainly. And the widow Pell, who had set herself against the marriage at its start, took to saving Marin a place in the pew beside her, which from the widow Pell was as near to an apology as the woman had ever come, and Marin took the place and said nothing about the store, having long since put the whole of it down and walked on. The cottonwoods at the ditch went gold and then bare, and the first true cold of the year held off the way it does some years, and the warm dry dusks ran on long past their season as if the country itself were reluctant to let that summer go. On a warm evening at the very end of it the two of them sat out on the mended porch step, her shoulder against his, a lamp burning low behind them in the kitchen window, the smoke from the chimney going up straight into the still air, and they watched the dusk come down violet and gold over the low field that had saved them both. She had the box of seed in her lap, going through it the way she did of an evening, the saved seed off this year's crop sorted into its paper packets for the next, and the blue ribbon was in there still among the packets, and Caleb saw it and did not say anything, and she saw him see it and did not say anything either, and she folded the lid down over the whole of it, the seed and the ribbon together, the thing she had meant to keep. "You never did tell me what was in that trunk," he said, though he knew now. Everything I had, she said, which was seed and not much else. It was enough, he said. It was, she said, and leaned her head against him. Then she was quiet a while, and the nighthawks came out over the stubble field, and at last she said, in the low, even voice she used for the things that cost her something to say, "My father lost his ground, and it killed him. And I told myself a long time ago I would never let myself want a place again, because wanting a place is how they get you." She turned the Flat Creek stone over in her hand, the one he had brought her for the wind. "I broke that promise the second week I was here," she said. "I am glad I broke it." Caleb put his arm around her broad shoulders and drew her in, and he was not a man for speeches and did not make one. "The ground is yours as much as mine," he said. "It is on the deed now. Both our names. I rode in and had it done last week." He had not told her that either until now. "So it cannot be taken from you the way his was. Not while I am living, and not after." She did not answer that in words. She set the box of seed down on the porch board beside her, careful, the way she set down a thing that mattered, and she took his hand in both of her own and held it in her lap. And that was her answer. And it was enough, and they sat on the step a long time after the light was gone, not saying anything more. Because there was nothing more that needed saying that the season had not already said. For them. The lamp burned low in the window behind them. A horse shifted in the pen. The last of the dust on the road settled in the warm dark, and somewhere out past the ditch the dry creek that had nearly taken the corn ran low and quiet in its right channel, and the long rows waited for the spring, and the two of them stayed out under the first stars until the cool came up off the flats at last and sent them in. And that was the story of Marin and Caleb Hart, a woman who came west with a trunk full of seed and asked for nothing, and a man who married her to keep his land and only learned too late to pretend otherwise that he had kept something worth a great deal more. He signed the papers to save the ground. He did not know, until it was too late to call it anything else, that she had been saving him the whole time, quietly, the way she did everything, and never once asked to be thanked for it. Tell me in the comments if you enjoyed this one and where you are watching from tonight.